Hello and welcome to episode 74 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined this week by WFAN's Lori Rubinson. Lori, thank you so much for taking some time with us this week. I know everyone's excited spring training's back. I know we'll get to that, but appreciate you taking some time with us.
You're very welcome. Happy to be here. And I say this every weekend in football season. I say TGIF, thank God it's football. But this time of year, TGIB. Thank God it's baseball. Thank goodness it's cold out, but we're close. You can see that spring is coming and baseball is almost here.
Absolutely. The calendar's turning now. It feels like spring training and the season starts earlier and earlier every year, which as a fan, I like it. I'm sure that the teams in the Northeast don't love coming back up here in the cold in March, but excited it's back, like you said. But obviously the Mets played their first couple games of the spring this weekend. First thing I kind of want to get into mainly as far as that fifth starter spot in the rotation. Obviously, we know the news about Senga going to be out probably about a month or two. They're talking about shut down for opening day there. But a couple of guys that pitched this weekend in particular, Tylor Megill and Jose Butto, talking about that fifth starter spot. Both guys pretty good kind of first, audition of the spring. No walks or anything like that. Each picks a couple innings, struck out a couple of guys. I just want to get your thoughts overall on kind of that fifth starter competition now with Senga being out and how you think that kind of opens the door for a couple of guys like these.
Well, first of all, let's talk about Senga for a moment.
Sure.
And big picture this season. And about a week or so ago, I was on the air on WFAN, and I actually said I made a prediction, which is for all the negativity that's swirling around the Met fans wanted more spending and all of this. I look around the National League, and I think that I predicted the Mets as the third wild card team.
Okay.
I look at, you're looking at obviously Dodgers, Braves.
Sure.
Somebody has to win the Central. We're at three teams.
Yep.
Philadelphia, let's say Arizona. And now there's one more wild card spot. And I look around and think, tell me who really is. I understand their holes and their problems,
Sure.
but I do think 85 wins gets it. And I thought that could be the Mets. In particular, I said this before Senga was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And admittedly, it's a big blow. And when you look at the timing, and they're saying, well, late April, early May, that's the best case scenario.
Sure.
All goes according to plan. And oftentimes, I think Mets fans know, somehow in the Met universe, if all goes according to plan and the Mets don't always get used in the same sentence.
Sure.
So I think this fifth starter role is really important, not just for Senga, but for others throughout the season. And you need six starters and you need that depth. And frankly, this day and age, you need 7, you need 8. So all these guys we're going to talk about are probably going to be important and play a role.
Right.
But you mentioned, so now let's, I'm going to put in my head and say Senga, if he's back mid-May, I think that's a good outcome for the Mets and Mets fans. And it is a big setback in terms of them being that third wild card. But the difference of whether they will be that or not comes down to that, I think, the starting pitching and the depth in that starting pitching. And so you mentioned, Tylor Megill is an obvious one, has filled that role coming out of spring training now for a couple of years. Butto certainly looked good. Yesterday, looked good his first spring training start. I'm also really intrigued to see Joey Lucchesi.
Mm-hmm.
And then today, Max Kranick got an opportunity. And so I'd throw all 4 of those guys into the mix and say that fifth starter coming out of spring training, assuming no one else gets hurt, and we're really just looking at that one spot, I think it's all 4 of those guys. And one thing I would point out that at least to me is interesting is that of all 4 guys I've just mentioned, 3 of them have minor league options. And one doesn't. Max Kranick is not the guy anybody's talking about, but he does not have he's out of minor league options. Wow. All 3 of the others have them. So I wonder, somebody I think in that group of Megill, and Lucchesi is going to have to separate themselves from everybody else in a clear way, because if it's even and Kranick is even with the others, we've seen this before, and it's frustrated Met fans at times where you go, hey, this guy's a little better than that guy, but the guy with options gets that opportunity first, because otherwise the Mets are worried about depth and worried that they're going to lose him.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And, I feel like you said, a lot of fans aren't talking about Kranick. That's a really interesting point. Like you said, he pitched a couple innings today. No, it seems like no starters so far between Megill, Buto, and now Kranick have walked batters. So you love to see that. That's great. Within, I think it's 6 combined innings between the 3 guys now. But so you like that, seeing that. Hopefully they command in the strike zone. But Lucchesi is another really interesting name, not just from as far as the starting rotation, but if all works out, he could be a really, maybe that Trevor Williams type of guy that they've missed, especially last year. Obviously a couple of years coming back from Tommy John, he was up and down last year, but so flashes of, of coming back. I think he was the first Met to pitch past the 6th inning last year in 2023, which is wild. His first start to come back from Tommy John, but he's a really interesting name too. And if they could get him, like you said, options will be, play a role there. But if he could be kind of that swing 5th starter, opener, long man, whatever you want to call that hybrid kind of guy, that could be huge for now a starting rotation, like you said, with Stang being out. Hopefully, maybe a month and a half there. That's going to be lacking depth, and especially with guys like, Severino, you don't have injury history. These 7, 8, 9 starters are really going to play key roles. And, I know we haven't really talked about it too, but guys like Vassell and Scott in the minor leagues are going to, I'm sure, get their chances as well. Because as we know, I think a lot of this also is trying to, audition acts for 2025, however they're going to spend in the offseason. And Stearns, I'm sure, wants to see the pieces that they think can kind of move forward and hopefully contend, 2025 and beyond.
That's a great point, which is, I think the Mets do intend to, I'll take them at their word, be competitive this year.
Sure.
And I think the definition of competitive was that's what some Met fans may interpret it one way, and Steve Cohen and David Stearns may interpret it another way. But I interpreted competitive as competing for a playoff spot, for a post berth, for a wild card, as opposed to we think we're coming into this season and we feel like we are a World Series contender. I think there's a difference between competitive for a postseason berth or contending for a championship.
Sure.
And last season, coming into the year, I think there was a hope, hey, maybe they're contending for a championship. It turned out that betting on 38, 39, 40-year-old plus, pitchers, in hindsight, it's not a great move, 35 plus, actually, when you look at, the rest of the rotation. So having a rotation that's a 35 plus, intention is not a great place to be. And they, especially, I think, with the pitch clock, all of that, I think they get that.
Sure.
So they, new plan. When one plan doesn't work, if you're smart, you make a new plan. And so this is not about contending this year, but it is about being competitive for a wild card spot. However, as you said, part of that is that look ahead with intention that they're thinking 2025. If we can develop some of these young players, figure out where we are, there are some very good players that are going to be available, including pitchers, on the free agent market. And that's where they're saying, all right, we're going to use that. We're going to use Steve Cohen's money, and we're going to look to really contend, be more of a contender 2025, 2026. And so that's where it may be frustrating, I think, to a lot of Met fans. I might look and say, Mark Vientos is I'm interested to see what he is. But if it were me, I'd be going out and, giving JD Martinez a 1-year deal, having a sure thing at DH, and having Vientos be more of my fight it out with Baty at third and or be my backup plan. That's what I'd be doing for this year. That's not what they're doing so far. And so, to your point, I think with the pitching staff, there may be many of us who look at it and say, hey, Jordan Montgomery's a great fit, not just for this year, but for next year. If prices are falling, if there's 3-year deals with opt-outs to be had, why not? I think you're right that they are, even if they were to go out and get somebody else, they're very interested in seeing those names we just mentioned.
Sure.
I think for Tylor Megill, we've seen periods of real effectiveness
Sure.
and then we've seen either injury or inconsistency. This is a really important year. He's not, I think he's 20, what is he, 28 or something?
Right.
He's not 22. Lucchese has had some injury issues, but there's a lot of talent there and a bit of a track record.
Mm-hmm.
So for some of these guys, now is a time. Show yourself. If any of them can be, David Peterson will come back. If any of these guys can truly show they can be consistent members of that rotation, well, now you're looking and saying, okay, do we only need one high-end free agent starting pitcher to finish off that starting rotation, or are these guys just not up to the task? And so I think that we will see a lot of the young guys are going to get their opportunity this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, we had Pat Ragazzo on the show last week, and we're talking the same kind of deal as far as with the Senga news. Could you see them go for a Snell or a Montgomery now? And the way he had kind of laid it out was with the way the Mets are with their payroll still. Essentially, those contracts, the way it was with the penalties, essentially they'd be paying double between the contract and then the fees. So it sounds like that's not the direction they wanted to go to, because for next year, obviously, you have to pay Pete Alonso. You have guys like Juan Soto that are going to be free agent. You talked about the free agent class going to be better than it was this year. So it seems like they're really trying to gear up, getting the coin purse together, so to speak, for the 2024-25 offseason. But one thing that I guess I'm a little nervous about, I don't know if Met fans think about it, is obviously Alonso on a walk year, right? The way things are going now, we don't know how competitive they're going to be or not, the way we're talking. I worry about a world where the Mets come the trading deadline are so far out of it that they may have to, or not have to, but entertain trades of an Alonso. I don't know if it's me kind of overreacting, for the worst. I worry the same thing almost with Diaz too. I know he's signed to a lengthier contract, but obviously bad teams closes go first as far as trades, and depends on the market. But could you really see a world kind of where at the trade deadline, if they are so far out of it, that they could maybe trade a Pete Alonso?
My gut says no.
Okay.
But, and we'll say this, and even if they did, there's nothing that says when he's a free agent at the end of the year.
Absolutely.
If they want, my belief is if the Mets want Pete Alonso back and to stay a Met, that's where they do have the richest owner in baseball. And so if Pete wants to stay a Met,
mm-hmm.
and the Mets want Pete to be a Met, we're not sitting here in, no offense to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Milwaukee. There are places where the reality is they can and will get outbid. But if Steve Cohen wants to, he can simply outbid anyone.
Sure.
And if you're Pete Alonso and we take him at his word, which is that he wants to stay in New York, he likes being a Met, he wants to be a Met, then, I would take him at his word, because I haven't seen anything to indicate otherwise. I think Mets fans, I talked about this last night on the Fan,
mm-hmm.
I think Mets fans are, I understand, but are burned by decades of the Wilpons.
Sure.
And so they don't quite understand what it means to be in New York City and have the richest owner in sports. I mean, not in sports, in baseball.
Yep.
You have the richest owner in baseball. And so when you have that, it's a totally different animal. It's like if Pete wants to be a Met, they're just going to, even if he's on the fence, they can outbid everybody.
Right.
So to me, no, I'm not worried about the Pete situation. I think the way other Mets fans are. Look, can I give you guarantees at the trade deadline if they're cratering and everything's falling apart?
Sure.
I suppose. But to me, this feels very different. If we go back to last year's trade deadline, this is really different than selling off 40-year-old pitchers.
Right.
Who, especially in the case of Scherzer, you're looking at it, you have seen the last few years, and you're saying, if our goal is eventually to win a World Series title, this guy the last few years has shown, whether it was dead arm with the Dodgers, falling apart and seemingly tired and running out of steam, against the Padres, the Braves and the Padres, the end of the season with the Mets. Look what happened last year with the Rangers. So they were right. That's something get that contract off the books. This guy can't help us win a World Series. Maybe he could be effective in a regular season at some point or whatever, but he's not going to be at his age able to get you where you need to be. That's very different than we have a homegrown, you can argue face of the franchise.
Sure, absolutely.
Here who loves New York, who Mets fans love, and not just the on-field contributions, but this Steve Cohen is a smart guy. And from a marketing standpoint, this is somebody who sells jerseys and tickets and, advertising because of him. And fans love him. And so the owner is not stupid, and the owner gets all of those things. So I don't think that I guess if the season were cratering and there was such negativity around the team that the Mets started to get a feeling that Pete was maybe considering not signing with them no matter what, then you do a trade-off. But if they're not hearing that from him, I think the bigger problem that Mets fans should consider is don't have the team crater. Even if you're around 500, if you're around 500 at the trade deadline, you're still right in the
You're in it. Right.
You're in it. Just be that team. Don't have a June like last year where you just fall off a cliff. You can't do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've said it. I think everyone here and Mets fans have the same feeling. You're not going to replace that production. You have no one waiting to replace that production. He loves the city, loves the spotlight. Get it done. And I think one positive, I guess, I would look at Aaron Judge, the way everything worked out, right? I mean, for Judge, he cashed in. He had a great walk here. I'm sure as far as the Mets are concerned, like you're saying, Cohen will pony up, when the time is right. He's not going to let, one of the face of his franchise walk out of the building. And if he has a good year, you pay a little more. But I guess they assume that if he has, maybe not as good of a walk year, you get him at a bit of a discount. So, I guess either way, kind of everybody would win there. But I do agree that ultimately, I don't think Stearns would want to start his tenure by letting the face of the franchise walk out the door. And I don't think Cohen will want to lose the good grace he has with fans. I guess I just, like you said, worry that they would crater, but just don't do that. Play well. And to that point, I know we talked about DHs before, and I wanted to just kind of circle back on that. I totally agree on JD Martinez. They've used DH as a whole for years now to kind of rest players and whatever. You had players like Daniel Vogelback and not in that position, putting him in spots that he couldn't do it. Someone like JD Martinez would be perfect. And again, if they are out of it the deadline, that's someone you could flip for prospects too. So that to me makes more sense.
Yeah, that's somebody, by the way, that you absolutely trade if you're not doing well.
Absolutely.
You go ahead. Those are the players, those 1-year deals. Of course, you make a trade.
Yeah, no, it's it's very interesting. It's interesting year, first year in the Cohen era that there's no definitive going for it. They're doing, trying to retool, so to speak. But I like what Stearns is doing. I like that they have a philosophy in place and a plan. From the minor league level, it sounds like they're developing good, putting his pitching lab to work and everything else. Stearns is going to have to find a couple of gems from the bullpen like he did in Milwaukee. But, if you can develop a couple of these guys and a couple of these guys that got traded for last year, the Gilberts, the Acuñas, a couple of them work out. This is still a good nucleus of players, I think, that they have.
Yeah, I'm excited about the bullpen and seeing what could happen. I know that some of these guys are not maybe the world's biggest names and things like that, but whether it is, Shintaro Fujinami, the Japanese flamethrower, and I understand he's got to harness his stuff a little bit, but the potential there is incredible. And I like the fact that Stearns takes swings. It's like go for ceiling, go for floor.
Absolutely.
Look at and tonnage. There's a lot of arms he's thrown into that bullpen, but we're seeing some of that Milwaukee strategy. And I guess in essence, where there are players where if you hit it, the stuff is there. If you can, if your pitching lab can figure out how to harness something with someone's mechanics or to tune in on the pitch or whatever it is that you see, if you can make somebody more consistent, go for some of that high-end stuff. And then the flip side is, yes, you throw in the, make sure you have the Brooks Raley and the Adam Ottavino, and you want to have some of those guys that are dependable, that you know what you're going to have. But why not take a shot on some of these guys that could be really, really interesting? And maybe the best name of the spring so far, Nate Lavender.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens there. But interesting. The other thing I've always thought with really good bullpens, and it's been a long time since I felt like the Mets did this, is great bullpens to me are ones where you see all kinds of different styles.
Absolutely.
It's not just everybody comes out and it's all one thing. They're all fastball, slider, 2-pitch pitchers. Everybody throws, 95 to 98. That's it. Same arm slot, whatever. That's not, to me, like a really interesting bullpen is, this guy's throwing is a submariner.
Right.
This guy is relies on his changeup. This one's out pitches the cutter. Show me guys who've got different kinds of things, because obviously if you're a hitter, well, now that's so difficult if everything looks different. And so that's also what I'm hoping the Mets are doing and Stearns is doing, is when you look at the pitching staff, is it's not just one prototype,
right?
That not everybody has to be the same.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Jorge Lopez, another guy like that, high ceiling. Hopefully it pans out, would be great. Fujinami, like you said, and once he moved to the bullpen last year for the Baltimore, seemed to hone in a little bit. So some guys there really with some high ceilings. Very interesting, like you said. But I think that's going to wrap everything up for this week. We covered a lot. It was only the first weekend of spring with games, but it feels like, so much kind of happened there. Obviously, Alvarez had a home run over the weekend, which we love to see. But, everything else as far as with spring training and everything else with the roster, we'll keep you up to date until then. But as always, let's go Mets.